So, hi everyone. Today is the very controversial topic of GP gaslighting. So, and in order to explain that properly, I think I need to tell the first part of my story. So, in March 2020, I contracted COVID, and I was on my back for about 2 weeks, really very ill. I was, to be clear, I never went into hospital. My breathing difficulties were minor, in my opinion, although I have asthma, so I've long since learned how to not to panic when breathing difficulties occur. And of course, I had my asthma pump available for when that did happen. So there was no need for me to go into hospital, but I was on my back for 2 weeks, and having had Omicron since then as well, I can tell you that the first strain was so much worse than Omicron. Whether that's because I had partial immunity or because it is just a lesser strain, I don't know. I can't tell you that. But the second time I had COVID with Omicron, I was up and around again within 3 days, whereas the first one put me down for 2 weeks. After I had COVID, I went straight back into full-time working mum, and the impact on that for me might have made things worse. I don't know, but I certainly spent all of my time either working or looking after the children or sleeping. There was no time for any recreational stuff or fun things, because everything that I did was taking 2 or 3 times as long to do. After a couple of months, I realised that this problem wasn't going away, and it had spread throughout my entire body. Every joint in my body hurt. Most of the joints that you could see were swollen, inflamed, sore, clicking, just generally I was in a very bad state all over my body. I had hellish brain fog. So even my work, which is majoritively done behind a laptop, even that was difficult for me. So during that time, as it became clear that I wasn't getting better, I started to see things about long COVID. And I looked into it, I looked into what they knew about it at the time, which was very little indeed. And I realised, yeah, this is probably what I've got. And I had a history of autoimmune type stuff as well. And it all kind of came together for me. So I made an appointment with a GP, playing the telephone bingo that we all play, trying to get through. And then sending messages through the messaging system, trying to get an appointment that way as well. And when I eventually got an appointment, I went in to see my previously favourite GP, and I sat down and I said, "Look, I've had COVID, and I'm not getting better. I'm feeling really tired and run down. Everything hurts. My brain is like smush." And she looked me over. She did do a comprehensive set of tests, but her the thing that she said once she'd finished examining me was, "I am 100% convinced that this is fibromyalgia, not long COVID." And she was very, very certain about that. And being the kind of person that I am, I accepted that as what it was. So she said, "Right, so we'll refer you to the rheumatologist, and you can see them, and they can conduct more tests, and then we'll get you a diagnosis of fibromyalgia." So I went home and I looked up fibromyalgia, and I didn't much like what I saw, but it was similar to what I'm going through or what I was going through then, and still what I am to a certain extent now. But I'm much better, and I'm going to share that with you over the coming weeks. And then I waited and waited and waited, and 6 months later I got an appointment to go and see the rheumatologist. So it was 6 months in pain, brain fog, unable to work, falling into debt, you name it. My life was turning in a very, very bad direction. So I get to the rheumatologist department, and I sit down, and because of the brain fog, I wrote a 1.5-page essay on what had happened to me, so that if on the day I couldn't form sentences and remember what I needed to say, that I could give that to her. And it was a good thing I did that. I recommend doing that whenever you go. Have something written down about what you're going through, like bullet points or a history or a progression of events and dates. If you can do that, then it makes it an awful lot easier to make your point. If you have brain fog like me, then doing that is absolutely essential. So recommend doing that. So I went in there, and it was one of those days, and I presented her with this 1.5-page essay, and I apologised in advance, and I said, I know you've only got a certain amount of time for this appointment, but if I try and ramble my way through this, I'll forget stuff because my brain's just not where it's supposed to be. So here it is. And she was very kind. She went, oh, that's brilliant, thank you very much. She took it off me, and she read it all, bless her. And then she looked me over and examined me. Now, apparently people with fibromyalgia have sore spots all over their body. Now, I had some, but they weren't as, apparently, according to this rheumatologist, they weren't as bad as they should be in order for a fibromyalgia diagnosis. So she looked me over, she, excuse me, my battery's going. She looked me over and poked me in various places and says, did that hurt? And then she sat down and she said, well, I've come to the conclusion that you have long COVID. And I blinked, looked at her, ding ding, and said, oh, okay, that's what I went for to my GP initially 6 months ago. And she said, right, well, we just get you referred to the long COVID clinic. I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, could you write to my GP and tell them what your diagnosis is firmly and give them instructions on what to do? Because my GP is absolutely convinced that this is my fibromyalgia, and I have a sense that she doesn't believe that long COVID is a thing. Bearing in mind, again, this is at least 1.5 years ago. So my GP may have changed her opinion at this point. So, and I'm not going to name any GPs because I'm just not into that kind of vibe. So there I was, 6 months down the line, having suffered, dropped into debt, got on into all sorts of trouble, and having an absolute pig of a time. And I'm back to square one, where I was 6 months ago, going back to my GP and saying, I have long COVID, please help me. And that, my friends, is GP gaslighting. Could have been accidental, it could have been, I can't diagnose that because I've got no protocol to follow. It could have been a number of things. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is something called a syndrome. Now, a syndrome is generally defined as a wide collection of symptoms that can be categorized in a certain way. So chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. And they group those together and they call them syndromes in order to identify them. However, there is one unspoken rule about syndromes when it comes to when it comes to community healthcare, i.e. GPs, that sort of thing, is that there's not a great deal you can do about them. You can treat the pain, you can treat some of the symptoms, but curing somebody with a syndrome is probably not going to happen. So now here's the psychology of a GP. GP has, and again, I'm not minimizing the gaslighting. What I'm saying here is that we need to see it also from their perspective. They have 10 minutes to see somebody, tops, absolutely 10 minutes. And if you walk in there with a long list of symptoms, then the amount of time they've got for thinking about how to deal with it and how to treat it is 2 minutes left. And they're under a great deal of pressure to prescribe things, and they have absolutely zero time to sit down and think about how to holistically care for somebody, because that's just not their job. If you need that kind of care, then you need a case manager. So a GP gets a great deal of satisfaction and a kind of a dopamine hit, bing, tick, if somebody comes in and they've got a chest infection, they prescribe antibiotics, and the person goes home and they think, yes, this person's going to be fine. But when you come in with the syndrome, there's not a great deal that they can do about it. Bear in mind, most of these people go into this with the objective of helping people and feeling good about it. And there's not a lot of feel good when it comes to syndromes. So the majority of GPs are going to feel a little bit unmotivated about people with syndromes, because there is no established protocol for curing them. And that became very, very clear to me as I researched what was wrong with me and started to work towards helping myself. So looking at that, in order to enable your GP to help you best under a 10-minute time scale, then the thing to do is to go in with your list that I talked about before, and go in with some suggestions on things that might help you. And one of the things that I'm going to do in this series of videos, and the next one will be the anatomy of a good GP appointment for long COVID. So where was I? Here goes the brain fog. Haha. Oh. So yeah, the next video I'm going to do is the anatomy of of a good GP appointment, and I'm not talking about critiquing GPs. I'm talking about things that you can do to go in there and make the most of your 10 minutes. And the things also that would be a good idea for your GP to test you for as alternative diagnoses. So, go in there with an open mind, but also go in there with objectives. So that'll be the next video. And I think that's it. I think that's all I've really got to say about GP gaslighting. I think that I think it's an understandable situation, especially in my case when it was so early on in the pandemic. There was very little support for GPs in terms of protocol to follow. There were the NICE guidelines were for COVID, were there, but not for long COVID. NICE, by the way, stands for National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and they tend to put forward the protocols for treating various things, and it's an excellent resource for all medical practitioners. Some of you will be asking, who am I to be making these videos? And I totally get it. It's a really, really good question. I don't have a background in medical. I don't. I have worked in pharmaceuticals, in marketing, and I've worked also on clinical trials. So my background has led me to the right places for research. And I've also dug around in places that some people would consider to be not good places as well, in order to get a balanced view, because I think that's really important. So what I'm going to tell you over the next video or so is things that I have learned during that time. They're not instructions for you. This is not medical advice. This is me telling you how I biohacked my body better. And my way might not work for you, but you are, if But you know, if your symptoms are different to mine, then you know, feel free to drop it in the comments, because I might have come across some research that's relevant, and I can help you that way, or make some suggestions. But again, no medical advice, because me not medical person. And I think we all need to take responsibility for our own bodies, and that is what my biohacking adventure is all about. Is eventually I gave up waiting for the long COVID clinic appointment. I gave up waiting for my GP to help me, and I got off my backside and I said, right, now I'm going to try and help myself. And it took absolutely ages, because there were days where I just didn't have the brain for it. Many days. But on clear days, I went out there, I read the research, and I read about chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia as well, because I consider them to be either comorbid or similar conditions. And I've used everything that I learnt during that time to compile what I'm going to tell you. Actually, to compile what I did for me, and that would be what I told you. Where am I now, you ask? I still have brain fog. I have moments where the brain just like goes over like a veil, and I'm just not there. You know, I'm going, what was that word? And it's a really simple word. I can stop mid-conversation and just stare off into space. I can look at something that I would have found absolutely simple to do in work and go, I don't know where to start. But I can walk much more than 50 meters. I can move my hips now. I have found various different ways to deal with my pain. And I am so much more active than I was. And being active has a domino effect to make you more and more and more active. So just dealing with the underlying problem was what brought me to a point where I could start fighting for my own health. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to fight for your own health. Because if we look at the lack of help for chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, ME, and all those other syndromes that I talked about, people aren't getting help. And there is a real hope amongst the medical community that the sharp edge of the number of people coping with long COVID will lead to research to help cure them, because there will be a hope within the pharmaceutical companies that they can make some money from it. Now, only one of my strategies involves medication, and I'll talk about that later. The rest of it is diet, lifestyle, supplements, etc. Not selling anything. I'll tell you what I bought and why I bought it and where to buy it from. Oh, there's an affiliate link. I might put it in. I might not. I don't know. What I'm really looking for is for people to like my videos and subscribe to the channel, so that this information goes as far as possible. What I really want, what I'm really here for, is to pass this information on to the people who really, really need it. Because I was in a miserable place last year. Even only 6 months ago, I was still in a miserable place when I hadn't quite unlocked everything I needed to at least have a semblance of a life. And I want to share that with you. I want to share that with as many people as possible, because everybody deserves to have their life back. And, you know, nobody deserves to be in the amount of pain that I was in. No one. So that's it. Please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video, which will be the anatomy of the of your first or your next GP appointment.